שלום לכולם.
Hello and all.
בהמשך ישיר.
Moving on directly.
זכות גדולה היא לנו,
It is
וכבוד
our
גדול
great privilege and honor
לארח כאן
to have
הבוקר
here this
את
morning with
הסופר
us
עמוס
the
עוז.
author Amos Oz,
איש המילים,
and the man of words,
איש הספר,
man
איש
of the
רוח,
book, a man
ואיש
of
פוליטי. לא
spirit and a
פוליטיקאי,
political
אבל
persona.
בהחלט
He's
איש
not a
פוליטי,
politician, but he's
שענייני
definitely
מדינה, חברה
one
וערכים
involved in politics.
לנגד עיניו,
He cares about
ואפשר לראות את
state
הדברים
values,
בבירור בין
and we
ובתוך
can see this
השורות
very clearly,
שנכתבות
reading
על
the
ידו
lines and
והן
in
רבות
between the
מאוד.
lines.
אני התלבטתי
I have
איזה משפט לבחור כדי להציג את הסופר עמוס עוז. יש סטטיסטיקות. הייתי יכולה לדבר על מספר הספרים.
I could have mentioned the number of books. I could have mentioned the number of languages into which his books were translated. And perhaps there is no point there. We're talking about a very big number. I did choose one quote or sentence that perhaps most appropriately represents it all. It was written by Amos Oz. This is not a spoiler. It ends his last book, his bestseller, The Word According to Judah. He wrote a sentence that left me without a breath. He stood and asked himself. It seems like a sentence that one doesn't understand, but Amos Oz is asking many questions, and he's answering some, and some of the answers he's going to share with us this morning. Amos Oz, the floor is yours. Thank you, Anat, for your lovely introduction. Good morning, one and all. I would like to talk this morning about dreams that Israel had better free itself from. And we'll start with the most important thing, something that to me is a matter of life or death for the state of Israel. If we're not going to have two states, and very quickly so, we're going to have one state. If we're going to have one state, it will be an Arab state from the sea to the Jordan River. If we're going to have an Arab state, I do not envy our children or grandchildren. I said an Arab state from sea to Jordan. I didn't see a binational state. Apart from Switzerland, all binational states and multinational states are struggling hard, whether it's Belgium or Spain, or already collapsed into a bloodbath. Lebanon, Cyprus, Yugoslavia, the former Soviet Union, Iraq, Syria, the Ukraine. If we're not going to have two states, and quickly so, it is very plausible that in order to wait to hold the establishment of an Arab state, we're going to have a temporary dictatorship of fanatical Jewish people that is racist, that is going to have a fierce control and suppress Arabs and its Jewish opposition as well. Such dictatorship will not stay here for long. Almost no dictatorship of a minority suppressing the majority lived and prospered for long in the New Age. Even at the end of this road, a dictatorship of Jewish minority over majority, even at the end of such a road, we are seeing an Arab state from the sea to the Jordan, and perhaps also international boycotting, bloodshed, or both punishment. Ladies and gentlemen, we have many wise people, perhaps also in this particular hall, that keep telling us that there is no solution for the dispute, and so they lecture to the idea of managing the dispute. Perhaps we should direct your attention to the fact that managing the dispute will be viewed just like last summer. Managing the dispute means actually a continuum of the Second Lebanon War and the Third and the Fourth and Fifth, a continuum of cast lead and pillar of defense, protective edge, and then we're going to have such and such rainbow and other names, and perhaps another intifada in the territories in Jerusalem up to the collapse of the Palestinian Authority, the rise of the Hamas, or another more extreme entity than the Hamas. This, at least in my eyes, is the meaning of the theory of dispute management. I have to note here, I do not represent anyone. No one's elected me. When I have sometimes a good lecture, I manage to represent myself, but not always even that. Now let's devote a minute or two to the resolving of the dispute compared to the management of the dispute. And I am telling you that for 100 years and more, and you can call it 100 years of isolation, for 100 years or more, we never had a better time of readiness of ending this dispute, not because Arabs have become Zionist all of a sudden, not because they're willing all of a sudden to recognize our historical right to this state, but because Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states and Maghreb states and even Syria of Assad have in the present time and the foreseen future a much more immediate enemy, more destructive and dangerous than the state of the Jews. 12 years ago, we had the Saudi Arabia proposition of peace. This is the Arab League proposition. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. I do not recommend Israel going and signing the dotted line at the bottom of this proposal. However, this is definitely worthy our negotiations and our arguing for. We should have done it 12 years ago. Perhaps now we would have found ourselves in a different place, completely different place. Such an initiative, had it been given to us at the times of Ben Gurion, Levi Eshkol, the nose of the Khartoum Arab Summit, we all would have gone out and dancing in the streets. And now I'll talk about something that is disputable, and I'm sure it's going to be disputable in this particular hall as well. Since the Six-Day War in 1967, we have never won a single war, not even the Yom Kippur War. A war is not a basketball match where the one who shoots more hoops wins the trophy, a handshake, and the applause of the audience. In war, unlike a basketball match, even if we burned more tanks than the enemy did, even if we toppled more planes and we killed more enemy soldiers and also conquered enemy land, does not mean we have won. The winner in war, ladies and gentlemen, is the one who obtains their goals, and the loser is the one who does not obtain its goals. In the Yom Kippur War, Sadat's goal was to shatter the status quo that was created in 1967, and he was successful at that. We were won over because we didn't achieve our goal. We didn't achieve our goal because we did not have a single goal, and we couldn't have had a single goal that is attainable with military force. Have I said by that military force is not necessary? God forbid. In every moment in the last 70 years, even this morning where we're sitting here talking in Ramat Aviv, our military force is constantly standing between us and between complete annihilation, provided that we remember that when we talk about Israel and its neighboring countries, our military force can only prevent a disaster, prevent annihilation, prevent mass destruction to our population, but we cannot win because we don't have goals that can be attainable with military force. And this is the reason for which I view the idea of managing the dispute a recipe for one problem after the other, not to mention one defeat after the other. Many Israelis, too many Israelis believe, or they're being brainwashed to believe, that only if we take a large stick and we beat the Arabs once more, very strongly, they're going to be scared and leave us alone once and for all, and everything will be fine. For about 100 years, we have been raising the large stick and larger, and it does not do any good, does not help. The right wing and the settlers tell us every time, once and over again, that we have all of the right to the Western Bank, to the Table Mount. But what exactly do they mean when they talk about the word right? A right is not something that I really, really want. A right is not something that I feel that really strongly belongs to me. A right is something that others recognize as my right. If others do not recognize it as my right, or if only some of the others recognize it as my right, then what I have is not a right, but rather a claim. And this is the difference between Ramle to Ramallah, between Haifa to Nablus, between Beersheba and Hebron. The entire world, including most of the Arab and Muslim world, recognize nowadays, whether they're happy to recognize it or not, the fact that Haifa and Beersheba are ours. Apart from Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, the entire world recognizes it. But there isn't a single entity in the world, apart from the settlers and their support in the right wing in America, perhaps, that recognize the fact that Nablus and Ramallah belong to us. And this is the difference between a right and a claim. Settlers and their support say that we have a right to the entire state of Israel and also the Table Mount, but they actually mean something completely different. Not that we have the right, but that we have a religious duty to hold onto it. When I go buy an ATM machine, I think that I have the right to draw 2,000 Israeli shekels. This does not mean that I have to withdraw 2,000 shekels every time I go by the ATM machine. When I stand by a crossroad, legally marked, of course, I have the right to cross the road. And if across there is a green light and even a policeman that would wave that I'm okay to cross the street, then of course I have the right to cross that street. But if I would see a truck running towards me 100 kilometers per hour, I also have the full right not to exercise my right, not to cross the road. And I'm talking, for example, about Table Mount. Why shouldn't Jews have the right to pray there? But we also have the right not to exercise in this generation this right. I would like to tell you, we have amongst us people where the dispute of the 70 years with 150 million Arabs is no longer troubling them. They're bored. They do not care for that. They want some action. They want to take us to fight the entire Islam. Indonesia, Malaysia, Turkey, Pakistan, the nuclear Pakistan. They're actually willing to go onto a war with the entire world. And I'm asking you, and I'm asking myself, dying for praying on the Table Mount? Temple Mount. This is not stated anywhere in our sources. And I'll tell you something that is very strong. If you want to go for a world war for Temple Mount, do it without me, without my children, without my grandchildren. Fighting the entire Islam is not even enough for them. I guess we have some people who are trying to lead us to fight the entire world. And you know, about 40 years ago, after the revolution of 1977 and the Likud party going to the parliament, one of the editors in Israel of the newspaper was so happy, was so much in euphoria, that he opened its editor's column with these words, and I'm quoting, "The victory of the Likud party in the elections in Israel is taking America back to its real size." Even today, I'm recognizing a certain Israeli attempt to put America back to its normal size, to ruin the alliance between Israel and America for the benefit of the alliance between our extreme right and America's extreme right. We must not forget, never, that at least twice in our history we found ourselves fighting the whole world, almost. And in these two other times, it ended bad, very bad. I see days that are not so far away, and I wish this is not true, where the workers in Dublin or Amsterdam's airports or Madrid airports will refuse to handle El Al airplanes. Buyers are going to boycott Israel produce, leaving it on the shelves. Investors and tourists would not come to this boycotted country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not foreseeing the future. We are halfway there. David Ben-Gurion taught us that the state of Israel could not stand without the support of at least one mega power. And which one is it? It changes. It used to be Britain, even Stalin's Russia. It used to be even England and France. In the last decades, it has been America. But our alliance with America is not part of nature. And kindly allow me to devote a minute and a half to one of the most important distinctions in a private man's lives as well as state lives. The distinction between what is fixed and what changes.
If one is unable to make this distinction, it's very dangerous to let him steer in the world. Kishon has the instructions for a friend how to come to him, go left at the post office, and then straight at the traffic light, and then turn left when the man is hitting his child. There are many people who, for decades, remember that we were warned that if we give back territories, a Soviet army will appear by Kfar Saba. I can't tell you for sure that if we were to withdraw from the territories, everything will be wonderful, but we can definitely say that a Soviet army by Kfar Saba we won't be seeing. That was our inability to distinguish between the constant and the fixed and the changing. Now, the present. Those same people who scared us for decades, telling us that the Soviets will be on our threshold, are now intimidating and scaring us that if we withdraw from the territories, Tel Aviv will see missiles, and so will the airport, and so will Kfar Saba. I don't know if that will be true or not. But please let me tell you, with the authority of a junior soldier in the army, that right now the airport can be hit by missiles, and not only from Kalkilia, also from Iraq, from Pakistan, even from Indonesia perhaps. And just like the Soviet army in Kfar Saba, we have with us a lack of distinction between the fixed and the changing. If not today, then tomorrow or the next day, it will be possible to lethally aim by missile to hit any point in the world from any point in the world. And will we then send the IDF to conquer the entire world? Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that the US is a superpower and it's our ally may change. If we try very hard, it will change very fast. But if the fact that the Palestinians are our neighbors and the fact that we are living in the heart of the Muslim world, that is a constant, that is fixed. Even the Iranian nuclear danger is changing, and it's not fixed. Because even if we or others on our behalf were to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities, we will still not be able to bomb their knowledge. And since nuclear Pakistan may tomorrow morning, if not tonight, become an Islamist state that is even more extreme than Iran, and it already has nuclear weapons, and because our wealthy enemies cannot be prevented from buying nuclear weapons off the shelf and aiming it at us, and mostly because in a few years' time, whoever wants weapons of mass destruction will be able to obtain it. And here, too, the constant has to be the intensity of Israel's deterrence, and the enemy's capabilities, whether they are nuclear or otherwise, are a matter that changes, which does not depend on us at the end of the day. I told you that unlike many of my friends in the left wing, I cannot guarantee that if we were to get out of the territories after a peace agreement, everything will be good. But I do believe that if we were to remain in the territories, things will be worse. If we remain in the territories, at the end of the day, an Arab state will be established from the sea to the Jordan River. And at this point, I would like to criticize myself a little bit, and to some of my friends from the dovish left wing. There are millions of Israeli citizens who are now perhaps willing to give up the territories for peace, but they don't believe the Palestinians. They don't trust them. They don't want to come out as suckers, and they're worried. But we should never underestimate fear, and we sometimes do that. We sometimes mock it. We can maybe try to dismantle fear or try to calm it down. Perhaps it won't be too bad for dovish left wing to share in this fear, because there is something to be feared. A person is scared, whether for good reason or not, should not be mocked or underestimated. Peace for land should be argued over, not with disdain, not with anti-Semitic caricatures. It should be argued over as people who are taking into account one danger versus another. And another mistake of some of my friends in the dovish left, I was not part of that, but some did make that mistake. They think that the peace is up there on a very high shelf in the toy store, and if you only were to touch it and reach out for it. Our father Rabin almost touched it in the Oslo Accords, but at the last minute he was too cheap to pay the full price and didn't give us the toy we wanted. Our daddy Ehud Barak almost touched this toy at Camp David, but then he was too cheap to pay the price and came back without it. And so the same with Daddy Olmert. We have a very cheap daddy. We have a cheap father who doesn't love us enough, otherwise he would have given us to us years ago. That's not something I believe in. I believe that peace has more than one partner. And an Arab proverb says, you can't clap with one hand. And after my lecture, you can try and see if you can. Ladies and gentlemen, my Zionist starting point is very simple. We're not here in this land. We're not alone in Jerusalem. And my Palestinian friends, I tell them the same thing. You're not alone here in this country. And we must have to share this house. It's very small, but we'll make it into even smaller apartments. Yes, a semi-detached. And a good fence makes a good neighbor, said the poet Robert Frost. And now we hear, here and there, the idea of a binational state. It comes both from extreme left and from extreme right, such as Moshe Arens. I think that a binational state is a very sad joke, not only because of what I said at the beginning, that whatever happens to binational states and multinational states in the world, but for even simpler reasons. You cannot expect Israelis or Palestinians, after 100 years of bloodshed and tears and disasters, to jump into the bed together and start a honeymoon. If in 1945, right after the Second World War, anyone would have said that Poland and Germany should become a binational state, they would have hospitalized them in a loony bin. I was the first, at 28 years old, who wrote very shortly after the 1967 victory that the occupation will make us corrupt. And in that article, I also said that it will corrupt those who are occupied. But no, we and the Palestinians cannot become best friends, one big happy family tomorrow morning, because we and them are not a happy or a family. We are two unhappy families, and we need a good divorce, a fair divorce, not a honeymoon. Perhaps in time there will be a federation or cooperation, but for starters, this country has to be a semi-detached house, because we are not going anywhere else. We have nowhere else to go, and the Palestinians have nowhere else to go either. This long-term rivalry is not a Hollywood western of goodies versus baddies. It's a Greek tragedy of justice versus justice, and very often, unfortunately, injustice versus injustice. And due to this perception, many call me a traitor, but I have to tell you that a surgeon in the OR, when he sees a person who has been affected in all areas of his body, if he's a good doctor, a good physician, he'll ask himself, what is more important? What is more urgent? What could kill this patient? in the state of Israel's situation, it is not the religious coercion. It is not even affordable housing. It is not even the price of cottage cheese. The ongoing fight with the Arabs is fast becoming our war against the entire world, and such a war is endangering our existence, our very existence. And perhaps it is now time to tell you loudly, before hundreds of people, to tell you the most secret, top secret, military top secret, the one that's most censored. And that secret is that we are in fact weaker, and have always been weaker, than any of our enemies put together. They have for dozens of years been under the rhetoric of annihilating Israel and throwing us out to the sea. And they could have easily sent hundreds of warriors our way, 2 million, 3 million warriors, and we wouldn't have been here. But they have never sent more than several thousands against us, because they knew that despite their savage rhetoric, the existence or annihilation of Israel has never been a question of life and death. Not in Syria, not in Gaddafi's Libya, not in Egypt, not even in the Ayatollah's Iran. If it were a matter of life and death for any of these, we would not have been here by now. Perhaps we are a life and death situation only for the Palestinians, but thankfully they are too small to be able to overcome us. However, please remember that the total of all our enemies may defeat us if, God forbid, they have real motivation and not just rhetoric and propaganda. Our adventure in Temple Mount may, God forbid, give them that motivation, that incentive. I'm not sure that we can end this rivalry between the Arabs overnight, but we can try. I believe that quite a long time ago, we could have minimized the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to an Israeli-Gaza conflict. I didn't say to solve it, to resolve it, but to turn it from a Palestinian-Israeli conflict to an Israeli-Gaza conflict. But if it weren't for our stupidity when we said that Arafat is too much of a killer to do business with him, and Abu Mazen is too weak and harmless to be doing business with him, we could have many years ago diminished this conflict into an Israeli-Gaza conflict, and it could still be done today. It's difficult to be a prophet in the land of prophets. We have too much competition. But I have to tell you that my long life experience has taught me that in the Middle East, words are forever. Or the words forever, never, or at all cost are somewhere between 6 months and 30 years. If anyone were to tell me, when I was in Sinai in 67 and in the Golan Heights in 1974, that I will go to Egypt and Jordan with an Egyptian visa and a Jordanian visa in my passport, I, the dove, I, the optimist, I, the one seeking peace, would have told that person, please, give me a break. Maybe my kids, maybe my grandchildren, but not me. And I did. I went to Egypt, I went to Jordan, I have a visa from Egypt and Jordan in my own Israeli passport. And now to end, I would like to tell you, in case you haven't heard, that for the last dozen years, in this country, there has been a golden age of culture that is fascinating and wonderful, in literature, in cinema, in the arts, in the high-tech, in science, in technology, even in philosophy. Usually, when people speak and reminisce about a golden age, only after it passes. But Israel is now, for the last few decades, in the midst of a creative golden age that is wonderful. And in terms of our spiritual work, Israel is a superpower, globally. I want to tell you, if you never thought of that, maybe you should give it a thought. Tel Aviv, our city, we're sitting here now, the first Hebrew city, is, at least to me, a collective creation of the Jewish Israeli people, and is no less important, and perhaps even more important, than perhaps the rabbinical literature written in the diaspora. Tel Aviv, to me, is even more important than Spanish poetry, the Golden Age in Spain in Jewish history. It is perhaps no less important than the Talmud, and it's only one of the collective creations we have created here in the land of Israel over our 100 years of solitude. And now I want to make a little confession. I love Israel, even at times when I can't tolerate it, when I can't stand it. And do you know why? I'll give you a story, just for 1 minute. Stanley Fischer, who was the governor of the Bank of Israel, told me that he went with his wife on a weekend in Cyprus for just 2 days. And the flights from Ben Gurion Airport go out at 1 a.m. and they land after 2 a.m. in Cyprus. At 2:30 a.m., the governor of the Bank of Israel stands very tired in the airport waiting for their luggage. And a traveler, an Israeli traveler, comes up to him and says, "Excuse me, are you the governor of the Bank of Israel?" "Yes, I am." "Where should I change my currency, here or in town tomorrow?" And that's what I love. That would not have happened to the Chancellor of the German Central Bank or the Bank of England or anyone in France. That's Israel. I love it even when I can't stand it. I love it because of this directness, this bluntness. I love it because it's just the way it is. And if I have to die on the street, I want to die on the street of Tel Aviv, not London, Berlin or New York. Because if I ever fall in the street, people will pick me up. And maybe other people will want me to fall again, but they'll pick me up again. And I want to end by saying that I'm very anxious about the future. I am afraid of the government's policy. I'm ashamed of the government's policy. I'm worried about fanatics, about violence that is becoming all the more prominent, and I'm ashamed of it. But I'm happy being Israeli. I'm happy being a citizen in a country that has 8 million prime ministers, 8 million prophets, 8 million messiahs, each taxi driver with their own personal view of how we can be immediately redeemed, all yelling and very few listen. I listen, that's how I make my living. It's not boring here, not dull for a moment. It's even fascinating spiritually and emotionally. Ladies and gentlemen, what I have seen throughout my life here is much less, but also much more than what my parents and their parents have ever dreamed of. Thank you all very much for your patience and tolerance.